Hello everyone, welcome and welcome back to the Prep. Today we have another session with a presentation skill for MBA, and we have our mentor Disha Mitra from XLRI, and she is right now going to take this session. So I hope you guys have an interactive session. Meanwhile, you can interact in the chat box. Any queries, anything you have related to the session, you can simply write down there. All the best guys, happy learning. Disham, you can continue.
Okay, thank you, Sumit. Hi everyone. Like Sumit already introduced me. I am Disha Mitra. I just finished my MBA from XLRI Jamshedpur in the BM batch, and I'll be joining Accenture Strategy and Consulting as a management consulting analyst in a few months. This session is basically to talk about the presentation skills that you would require while you enter your MBA. Before getting into the session, I would just want to give you a walkthrough. I'll just give an agenda of what we are going to discuss today. So, first, we'll talk about why PPTs matter in the first place, because PPTs is not something that you'll only be doing during your MBA, but post your MBA, maybe you'll end up in consulting, marketing, finance, wherever. PPT is something that will you will take forward with you. So, this is a very important skill that you create the foundation during your MBA and then you use it throughout your career, right? So why they are important. Then we'll move to the basic MBA framework that the deck framework that you should use, and that would help you across 90% of the presentations that you make. We'll talk about a few hygiene checks and few design principles for PPTs. Then I would also give you a walkthrough of the different kind of MBA decks that you would be requiring during the course of your MBA. And then we'll end the session with a few example decks of some of my case com decks that I made during my MBA and how they're different from how a normal group assignment that you get during a classroom. So these are some of the broad topics that we'll be discussing. I will not be giving you any tips on what kind of PowerPoint shortcuts you should use or what kind of animations you should do, because that is something that you will learn during your MBA. But these are just the basic hygiene checks that you should do and how you should actually structure your thoughts and why PPTs. Like, how do you actually put your ideas into PPT? What is the flow that you do, like you follow? That is important before you actually, start making the PPTs. So first, starting with why PPTs matter in MBA, right? So you can see a lot of numbers on your screen right now, like why like 70% of your MBA grades involve a lot of presentation, right? So like I told you, I've just finished my MBA and I can tell you that out of like 90% of the times, every kind of presentation that we have, be it group, be it individual, we always do it through PPTs. So that is like a very important skill that you need to learn right from the first day of your MBA till you end your MBA, right? So a lot of your presentations, be it not just your classroom ones, your case competitions, you take part in live projects, you go for your internships, right? There you will have your mid review and end review. Even those things happen through PPTs. So PPT is something that you will use everywhere. And then how the attention span, like how do you structure those PPTs? How do you make it visually interesting for people to, grab their attention for a longer time? So these are some metrics or some numbers that show you why PPTs are important. And then where will you present in an MBA? So like I said, case competitions for your course submissions, like your group projects or individual assignments, during your internships, your life projects, and even during a final placement, right? There are a few companies also that sometimes ask you to make a PPT presentation before they take the interview round. So that is also a place where, PPTs come handy. Now moving to the MBA framework, the deck framework. This is like a very basic framework that I'm giving you here, but this is going to solve 90% of your problems. Like every problem statement that you get, you go ahead with this particular framework in mind and you just start thinking of how you should, design the slides. And then that is going to help you, structure your slides better. So what this framework basically says is, first you identify the situation. So whenever a problem statement is given to you, be it say a case form problem statement, like say a particular product wants to enter a particular company wants to enter the US market. So how would you help that firm do it? Just something as open as that, right? So here, when I talk about situation, have to give the context. So like I said, US market, you talk about the industry, you talk about the market. Why US market? What is the opportunity there? If the client enters that market, how does the industry look? The product that the client wants to launch, that product, the category that it comes under, how does the category look for that market? So this is how you define the situation, right? Then you move to the problem at hand. Now, once we know the context, once we know what the situation is, now we start defining the problem. We do a breakdown of the problem statement that is given to you. So you try to break it down better. Like I gave you a very open-ended question, but you start breaking down into why this, what is the problem in entering that market? Are there more number of competitors because of which you are not able to enter the market? What are the different kind of challenges that exist? You start defining the problem. That is how you move to the next step. Then we come to the question at hand. Now that we have set the context, okay, this is how the US market looks, okay, this is the problem, that these are the X, Y, Z issues that exist because of which we are not able, because of which the client has an issue with entering the market. Now we try to handle the question as to how will the client enter the market. So this is the central question that you have to address. And now you can also understand how you are setting up a flow, right? You are talking about the situation, then you came one step where you talked about the problem. Now one step ahead where you're talking about the question. Now once that is done and we are halfway through, now we start answering the question. And how do we do that? We start talking about the solutions. We start talking about the recommendations. Like how is the client going to solve this problem? How is the client going to give an answer to the question that they have? So here you talk about the solutions. Now every solution that you give, it should not just be a generic solution like, okay, this is how the client can enter the market. No, that is not how you approach. You have to support every answer with some evidence. Like it could be in the form of data, like you pull market data, you do some primary or secondary research, you do interviews, and that is how you generate some data. You could also use a lot of frameworks to rate the different solutions that you have and then analyze them using those frameworks to arrive at, okay, I had like 5 solutions, but using these frameworks I can, like, you start rating. There are different kind of frameworks which you will be learning during our MBA. Using those frameworks you can then come to a conclusion that, okay, the fifth solution is the one that we should go ahead with because of these. So how you're trying to back that particular solution with some sort of evidence or data, so that is also equally important. So never give an generic approach to the problem or the solution that you came up with. Always go ahead one step ahead by backing it up with some sort of evidence, some data, do some analysis of that solution, and also use some certain frameworks to support your data. So this is like a broad framework that you can keep in mind. How this helps you is whenever you have a problem statement at hand, say suppose you got a group presentation that you have to do in your classroom tomorrow, right? You know the problem statement, you can easily go to chat gpt and get information on that. But that is not how you're going to present it to the class, right? You would have like a lot of information from chat gpt. How are you going to structure it and put it on the slide? That is important. So you can start bucketing that entire thing into these 5 buckets. You can start looking at it from a situation perspective, then try to identify the problem. This is how you'll be able to structure 10,000 thoughts into say 1,000 thoughts. So this helps you, this always creates that framework or gives you a skeleton of how you should approach the problem statement that you have, and that is how you will also structure your slides better, right? So now we discussed about the framework. Now I'll just give you a very basic, skeleton structure of how a slide should look. It's not like a one-stop skeleton structure, just an idea. You can just take this, and later on, while discussing the examples, I'll again show you a few of my slides as well, where you can connect this better. For now, you can just go through this on what this slide says. So there would be an action title which would talk about what that slide is. Then always use charts, always use visuals to create your slides. Never go with the generic paragraph thing, right? Where you just keep writing a lot of sentences and just fill your slide with text. Use charts, use visuals, and don't again clutter your slides with say 10 bar graphs or 10 pie charts. Use maybe one, like I mentioned, one chart. Sometimes you can go with 2 or 3, but use to make them more visual. Don't clutter your slides, and every chart or every visual that you're putting on your slide, there should be a takeaway. There should be a takeaway of why this chart is here. If the header is there is a chart, there should be a reason that you put that chart under this slide, right? So always talk about the takeaway. And that takeaway could be in the form of some data where you said that, okay, say suppose you put a bar graph which shows some 70% US market, 30% say UK market, something like that you put, right? Why have you put that chart? What is the takeaway? Then from the takeaway, we can say that, okay, 70%. So US is more dominated. So this is the market that we can get into. Some kind of insight you should draw from that chart, and how that insight helps you in your slides ahead, right? So that is how the story should go. So always use charts in your PPTs to make it more visual. It makes your PPT more beautiful. it makes your PPT look less cluttered because less number of text, and also it makes it look more premium, and like someone has thought through, someone has put in effort to make that chart, so obviously it's more thought through. So you also earn points there. And always cite your sources, whatever numbers or data that you're using, always keep the sources. If you can see, I put a source here at the bottom, right? Similarly for every PPT, in fact it becomes very important for your case com PPTs. In case coms you use a lot of information from multiple places, right? So you always cite them, that where did this information come from, which report, which year. Some example I've given, something similar to this you can all. And never forget to do that in case com slides. You lose a lot of points there. So make sure you always add sources. Then again, some hygiene checks on how you should design your slides. Like I said, one idea per slide. So basically, do not clutter your slides with 10 solutions in one place. Maybe make 10 different pages, but one slide should focus on one core idea and try to describe that idea better. So that whenever I am looking at the slide, I also don't feel very overwhelmed with, okay, why are there so many things on this page, right? So try to focus on that one, or maybe sometimes two, depending upon the number of pages you have, but always try to keep them less cluttered. Don't talk about everything in one place. Again, a lot of times people think that, okay, the PPT has a lot of white space, which means that someone might think I've not, worked more, or I've not researched well. That is not the case. White space never means it's a wasted space. Always, whatever you do on your PPT, structure is more important rather than focusing more on, okay, yahan to space bach gaya, what should I do? It looks empty and all of that. That is never the focus. And as a um, like people do not focus more on those things, rather you would focus more upon what is there on the slide, so focus more on those aspects. And again, a very important hygiene check is your color and fonts. Do not use a lot of colors in your slide, especially with your case competition PPTs. For example, if it's a company which has the company logo has a blue color or violet color, try to maintain the deck's theme as something like similar to that. Always use the logo of that company in your deck, and do not use more number of fonts, like use 1 to 2 fonts. Maybe within a slide, I always try to make the font very consistent. Maybe across slides you might change depending upon the requirement, but within one page try to keep the font very consistent. That is highly important. A lot of times we think of this as a very minute thing, but when you prepare, say you're presenting it to your during your mid review, during your SIPs, to your company, right? So they keep a lot of focus on these things as well, like the number of the different types of fonts you've used, what color you have used. So these are also important things that you should always keep in mind. Now, these are some do's and don'ts. Some of this I've already spoken about. I would maybe give you like 20-30 seconds. You can just go through the do's and don'ts and just give a read and give it a read. For example, um, like I've mentioned here, use slide numbers, right? This again seems like a very small thing and no one would forget about it, but it is highly important. A lot of times while preparing slides, you always forget that we have to put the page numbers as well. So that is also something that these recruiters or these companies look for when submit your case com decks, or maybe when you're doing your mid review presentation at your summer internship, right? Then again, use high contrast text, right? For example, the theme, like you can see, if this is a dark theme, I'm using a white theme on that, because white looks visually better and also matches, contrasts it better. So these are very minute things, but very hygiene checks that you should always follow from day one, so that you never, these are so that you become accustomed to it with the process. This does not seem like a task to you, right? Similarly, on the don't side, if you see something like use 5 different fonts and 10 colors, never do that. Do not use 5 different fonts, because when I'm going to the slide, I will also realize, okay, the font looks very different from what it was earlier. So always keep these things, and never forget to proofread, because nowadays what we are doing is most of our content is chat GPT generated or Claude generated, right? And everyone knows that the content is chat GPT generated. So in that case, it becomes even more important that you proofread your content multiple times before sending it across, right? So never forget to proofread. Okay. Now, moving to the narrative flow. So till now we discussed more on the slide design aspect, on what are the different things that you need to keep in mind when you design your slide, right? Now this slide, the storytelling slide, talks about how do you present that slide. Again, this is somewhat similar to the framework that I discussed earlier. It's just an hint on how do you start your presentation, how it attracts people, how it keeps them hooked to your PPT more. So whenever you start presenting, always start with a question or give a statistics. For example, this market is dominated by this product for the last 30 years. Something as surprising as that, that people are hooked to, okay, what is this person exactly saying? Creates a sort of tension among them. You always try to start a PPT with a question like, have you ever thought that this could also happen? Something something like that. So always try to start your PPTs that way. Then the flow goes very much similar to what we had discussed earlier, that is setting up the context. You talk about the background, you talk about the industry context, you talk about the market, the different stakeholders. Then you talk about the problem that we have at hand. You bring in your recommendation here, and finally your action, right? Now there is a very unique, not a unique, there's a very, there is this framework pyramid principle that McKinsey uses, where it's widely known. What this principle basically talks about is you start your PPT with the answer. Basically, the key takeaway of that PPT is, okay, this is the answer or this is the solution that the client should go ahead with. You start your PPT with that this is the major takeaway from the slide, from the presentation. Just like I told you about start with the statistics or a question. You can simply start with your solution. Just say that, okay, XXYY thing needs to be done. Just say that. You give that answer and then you start supporting your answer. And then you go ahead with the entire process of, talking about the context. Then you start supporting it through some key arguments. And then you back each argument with some sort of data or evidence, like we discussed earlier. That is also a very good way to go ahead. That is called the pyramid principle. You can go ahead with that. This is mainly important when you present your PPT, present your content. Like your PPT might not start with the solution. PPT might be starting with the way we discussed earlier, but you could just, when you're going to deliver, you just start with, okay, this is what we should be doing. And then you start giving a background to it so that it hooks the audience to your presentation. Okay. Um, then this is some information. So before this, I would want to tell you about the different types of decks that you would majorly be making during your MBA. So one would be your case competition deck. This is something I think most of you are aware about. Like during your MBA, you would be participating in a lot of case competitions. You would have to do a lot of submissions. Sometimes some case competitions ask for a one pager or two pager solution. Some ask for an extensive one. I'll show you both how one pager works versus how a extensive deck works. The one pagers are mostly your executive summaries, where in one page you try to describe the entire thing. So you have to put everything there. So these kind of decks are very cluttered. In general, case competition decks are more cluttered than how a client deck or how a professional consulting deck should normally look. But yeah, that is how the case competition decks in general are. But again, that does not mean that you hamper the structure when you're, even if it's cluttered. The structure is always maintained. So one is the case competition. Then we move to your course submission deck. These are basically your classroom presentations, like the group assignments or any individual assignments you have. So here the audience is again different, right? Here you are doing it for your professor. So what a professor looks at sometimes is different from what a recruiter or what a case competition judge would be looking at, right? So in course, for example, you have to talk about a lot of frameworks explicitly. Maybe in case competition decks, you might not be talking about frameworks explicitly, like say pestle analysis. You would not explicitly mention the slide as pestle analysis and talk about it in a case competition deck. But for a course deck, for a group presentation, say for a classroom presentation, you would openly be discussing how special analysis looks, how a BCG matrix looks, and all of that, right? So these are some of the aspects how a classroom presentation might be different. But again, the base is same, the structure is followed. Then a live project deck. Live project deck is basically similar to how your internship decks would look, because these are generally you pitch to companies outside of your college. Mostly you do with certain companies. Sometimes you do it with the professors as well. Mostly it is with companies. So for them, the deck structure is again a bit more professional than how a classroom presentation or a case competition deck in general is. And depending upon the different types of decks, again, this is the slide which talks about the different audience that you have. Again, like I mentioned, if it's your professor, the information on the deck would slightly be different from how it is for your recruiter. And again, once you join a company, so the last two blocks are not very relevant for you right now. This is when you move into your, your firm, when you start working there, what kind of decks you make there. This is more important from that aspect. So maybe you can let it go for now. Um, yeah. Now coming to the different tools, resources that you can use, or maybe before your college starts, you can maybe focus a bit on them and how these tools work. So on the deck side, you can of course, the PPT, Microsoft PowerPoint is something where you will be designing most of your PPT. So that is a skill that you should know. Maybe you can do some go around the tool and just see what all options are available. Maybe YouTube a bit and just play around the tool, and you will eventually will learn how to use it once you join your college. But even if you have some time right now, you can just play around the tool. Canva, like if you can see on the deck, I've specifically highlighted Canva, right? Canva is going to be your best friend during MBA. I mean, so every deck that you're going to make, you're going to use Canva for it. Like it's a such a handy tool. I can't even start to explain how handy Canva is, especially during an MBA, because when you move to corporate, most of your decks you design using PowerPoint, but for every classroom presentation, individual presentation, Canva is a very handy tool because the different kind of options or edit options, different kind of tools that it has embedded within it. It is much more easier to use when compared to a PPT, what PowerPoint offers you, right? So I would urge you to, if you do not know what Canva is, I would urge you to, after this session, go to Google, just search Canva, just try to use it, create something on your own. It's very simple to use. Once you start using it yourself, you'll realize. And it has a lot of resources, a lot of templates. You do not have to even design templates on your own, right? You can just use the ready-made templates that Canva has and design your classroom presentation. So it comes very handy, especially for these group assignments that you have, because you can do them faster using Canva. But especially for your case competitions or your mid reviews and reviews during your SIPs, I would suggest that you use PowerPoint because it looks more professional that way, right? Apart from that, again, Notebook LLM is a tool that you can also use to create PPTs these days. Of course, it is an AI thing, so I would not ask you to, just blindly use it to generate your PPTs. But again, you can just play around the tool to see how it is used. But it is also a very advanced tool where you can actually start generating PPTs. And then your Cloud Chat GPT, that is something you are very familiar with, I understand. These are a few frameworks that you can also, refer to. Pyramid principle, like I talked about. These are some McKinsey frameworks here. MECE is a very important framework that you can use to, structure your ideas better. And for practicing, you can always go to case competitions are a very good way to, start making PPTs. In fact, my PPT skills improved through case competitions. So I would say that participate in as much case competitions as you can. You would definitely improve your PPT skills there. And finally, your use of AI, right? Definitely, you would definitely use AI to, do market research, get information about the subject, because AI, not like no one denies that AI is not going to help you in researching, help you in structuring, help you in summarizing, help you in finding the right sources that you should refer to. But be very cautious that everyone today knows how powerful AI is, right? Even I know that if someone is giving me some content which sounds very, professional or something, that individual has definitely used AI. So you take content from AI, but try to, focus a lot on how you can modify it and humanize it to match better. And because in college also, every presentation that you make, right, your professors would be very sensitive to plagiarism there, so they would not tolerate even a single uh, but like I remember that we had a few professors who did not like AI in any of our assignments. They would, check how much AI do we have in every presentation that we made, right? So do not blindly use AI. Do not just copy paste everything from ChatGPT to your PPTs. Definitely use it for researching. Definitely use it for getting content. But when you design the PPT, use your own brain and try to you frame that content in a more humanized way. It saves you, like, you do not lose out marks because of plagiarism, and at the same time, it also helps you work better on your PPTs. I mean, in terms of the content that you're putting there. Okay. Yeah, so and also always use your own analysis and judgment, because a lot of times you would have also seen, right? Do not directly ask AI to, start providing you sources that you should refer to. Never rely on AI for, downloading annual reports and all of that. Always go to that company's website and download, because a lot of times the sources that AI provides, this is a personal experience again, are sometimes false as well. So always do that double check. Definitely use it to summarize the annual reports, but never directly download it from there. Go to the company's website. Do one level, dig one level deep, understand what the thing is, and then maybe you can use AI to, structure it better, summarize it better, understand things from that particular particular document that you're referring to. But do not blindly use it for research, because sometimes a lot of its sources are also false. So yeah, these are more or less some of the things that I wanted to discuss about. Now we can maybe move to uh, some decks, some example decks that I wanted to show you guys, and maybe tell you how is one different from the other. Just give me 1 second. Just give me 1 minute, guys. Yeah, sorry about that. There was some. Yeah, I hope the screen is visible. Can someone just confirm and chat? Okay. Okay, so this is first I'm showing you a executive summary sort of slide. Um, so what I talked about executive summary was like I mentioned that executive summary basically is in one slide you have to talk about the entire idea that you have. So that means you have to talk about the problem at hand. You have to talk about the industry context. At the same time, you have to also mention the solutions that you come up with. So if you can see this particular slide, this was for a case competition that we did. So if you see this particular slide, it looks a bit cluttered, right? But at the same time, it has followed all the structure that we talked about before. If you can see this side of the case competition, this side of the slide talks about, the problem at hand. This talks about the industry part. This talks about the problem, like the competitors there. Then here we talk about how we are going to solve this. This is the solution part of the slide. So if you see two slides, we had to present two ideas for this. So that's why we have 2 pages. This entire slide is covering everything that we had. So if we are talking about the Gen AI interventions here, we're talking about the solutions that we came up with, and then we're also talking about the KPIs and how we are measuring it. So we are backing it up with the solution that we have. We're backing it up. Okay, with through this KPI, this solution proves to be better. To this KPI, this solution proves to be better. So the structure that I discussed first, we have tried to, everything is used. So now it is only on within one slide. Of course, in one slide, you have to put everything. It's definitely going to look cluttered, right? But at the same time, you can see I've tried to make use of visuals here. Like I used a bar chart here. I used a graph here to show competitor. So how I'm trying to use visuals, to make it look better and at the same time make it look more professional as well. Now this was the first idea. So the first stage of the case competition was to put your entire idea in one slide. So this is how we put it across one slide. This is again a second idea that we had. So this was the first, and then the next part of the present next level of this case competition was to extend this idea, right? So you see we have tried to extend this idea here now. So if you can see that one idea, I've tried to break it across 13 slides here, right? So if you can see how I've tried to break that idea here. Now here I'm talking about every solution in one page. See, if for example, if you talk about this slide here, you can see I took one, so GenAI interventions, there were four, I took one, I tried explaining it here, I tried talking about the KPIs here. Then here you can see solution number three, you can see solution number four. I've tried to explain them better. I'm talking about what is the pain point that is getting addressed, how the solution is working, and what are the KPIs. Again, the structure we followed, the problem at hand, what is my solution here, and how, and I'm backing it up through data. I'm backing it up through KPIs here. So the flow is again followed. And if you can see, one idea, like one thing, we are trying to make it more extensive. So that's why we have like how we have broken it up, how it looks very clear in terms of structure. There is a, like, if you remember the skeleton that I showed you, there was a, at the top it was written action or insights, that insight. So here you can see an action point, that what this slide talks about, right? So this is how a case competition slide looks. Now I will show you how my, I will now compare it to how a normal classroom slide looks like, right? Um, I think so. This one. So, yeah. Okay. So this is again a presentation. This is a group presentation that we had for a classroom assignment. It was a strategy assignment. So here, if you see, like I was telling you, right, how we, in the case com slide, I was not using any framework explicitly, because I would take insights from it. I would try to draw some insights by using a framework in the backend, but I would not explicitly talk about it in that. But when I do a classroom presentation, right, the professor wants to see that whatever he has taught in the classroom, we're able to understand that or not. So for that, I definitely have to use all the matrices that he's teaching, all the analysis methods that he's telling in the classroom. So for this, if you can see, I've done a competitive landscape. Then I talked how BCG matrix we're using for this problem, how we are doing it, how we are doing a SWOT analysis. There is a consumer behavior data, analyze that. All of this is there. The pestle analysis. This is basically more extensive, talking about everything that the professor has taught from their perspective. So if you can definitely see how this is somewhat different from how the case competition slide was. I'm not saying that they're 100% different. 80% they're the same thing. It's just the minute differences on how a classroom present, what is the requirement of a classroom presentation compared to what is the requirement of a case competition, right? Because if I take you to the beginning, you would find it very similar to how case competition slide looks. I've talked about the current scenario, there's a current context, I've talked about the market, I've talked about the challenges. If you can again see, the framework is being followed. We talked about the challenges, then we talked about the plan, the solution that we came up with, and backed it up with data here. So more or less the idea, the framework for every PPT, if you can see, is same. Just how minor differences in how we are presenting it, like what is the requirement, who the audience is, based on that we do some changes. But the idea remains the same, that you have to use data, you have to use frameworks to analyze things. You have to be very professional in terms of how it is visually more appealing. All of these things you have to keep in mind. And very similar to how internship, your mid review or end review deck would be when you move for your summers. That is again a more professional platform. Those decks are very less cluttered compared to a case competition deck, or some deck similar to what I'm showing you right now. But it would try to capture everything that you have done there. So again, it again comes to how you're structuring those slides better. You might have 1,000 ideas in your mind, but which 10 from those 1,000 do you put in the slide? That creates the difference basically. So yeah, um, more or less, these are the things that I wanted to let you guys know. Some major takeaways is, the first and foremost thing that you should do after this session is go and try how Canva works and really figure out how this tool works. When I started my MBA, did not actually know how Canva worked, and it took me some time to actually understand. But once I did, I realized how useful a tool Canva is, especially for these immediate PPTs that you have to make for a corporate or case competition presentations. Always try to use PowerPoint as a tool. Yeah. So I think more or less that is there. Maybe we can move to the Q&A part now. If you guys have any questions, I can see some questions on the chat. Yeah, you can use Google Slides as well. It's just that Google Slides sometimes becomes a bit chaotic in terms of, putting like from personal experience, again, it gets sometimes chaotic while formatting it or while putting some visuals there. PPT becomes more handy in that case. For example, like a world map, if you're using, or maybe a lot of bar graphs or pie charts, sometimes the formatting becomes tough in Google Slides. But if you are very friendly using Google Slides, you can definitely, use it. But yes, Canva, of course, is very much easier. Also, since you guys are mentioning about finalist decks and all of that, so these two PPTs that I showed you, one of them was because it was a national finalist deck, the second one which I showed you, and like Sumit mentioned, so if you're part of CaseCom program, you'll definitely get a lot of PPTs, similar PPTs from finalists, winners, semi-finalists, and all of that. So, how much time did it took to make this PPT? Which PPT? Are you talking about the one which I'm presenting to you right now or the case competition one? So the case competition one, I think it took us some time. The first executive summary, I think that took lesser time, but preparing the PPT becomes easier once you've ideated it, right? So the ideation part takes more time because if you have to present everything in one page, right? So you have to really think through which things I have to put. You cannot put everything. When you make a 10, 12 pages slide, it's easier to put content there because this page is solution, this page is this. But in one pager, it takes you have to really funnel it down to which things I need to put in that slide, right? So I think the ideation took more part. The PPT definitely took lesser time, maybe 2 to 3 days, and it was a team task, right? So we were three people. So that way, the other one, the extensive one, definitely took like a week or so. But yeah, once the ideation part, like I mentioned, the ideation part and structuring part is more important. Right now, you might be thinking ki, it looks like the visual part is more difficult. That is how I also used to feel about PPTs. But later, when I started working on them, I realized that structuring is more important. So if you want, I can show that PPT. Yeah, if you see the structuring aspect right here, if you see, if I do not miss this aspect, which means that I've not talked about the industry in general, which is like setting the context. If I don't put this, I'm not talking about the problem at hand, like how the competitors are playing against us. So and if you go to Chat GPT and you put the question that we got, you'll get a lot of content. How do you decide that, okay, I have to present it in a bar graph? How do you decide which points from Chat GPT do I have to take? So that is the ideation part. And definitely PPT, making PPT also takes time. Like you have to make it a bit color. If you can see, we have done some color coding here in order to create the index and all of this. So I think a bit of practice also comes into play. So if you have been making PPTs for some time, like you would be doing for your presentations and all, definitely, you will build that skill. And if you go through a lot of case competition decks as well from your seniors, super seniors, past year winners and all of that, you also get an idea from there on how you should present things on the slide. So these are some of the ways you can actually work on it. Yeah, you don't have to learn Canva as such. You just start using it because everything is there. It's like your phone. You just have options everywhere. You just have to choose shape, line, everything is just there. Just start using it. You will realize how easy it is. Yeah, there are a lot of templates. You can figure it out based on what the requirement is. Yeah, you can change color. Yeah, you can do that depending on what you want your how you want your PPT to look like. It's not a problem. Anything else, guys?
Hello, Disha. I don't see any questions from the students, and I guess most of the doubts are already cleared. And seeing the same on YT, there is no queries. So we are going to wrap up the sessions, and thank
Yeah.
you very much for this wonderful session. And
Thank
guys,
you.
if you have any queries, you can simply ask in the chat box, or you can unmute yourself and speak. And for those who are watching through YT, guys, we are going to end the session here. So I wish you very best and see you in the next session.